Hi everyone, my name is Anne Schwiger and I am founder of the Digital Equity Project and also a member of the City of Cambridge Broadband Task Force. Thanks so much for joining us here today at Digital Inclusion Meets Civic Tech, today, tomorrow, and beyond. Before we get much further, I'd like to take a minute to just tell you how we're framing digital inclusion and digital literacy today. So first, let's start with digital literacy. So the way we are approaching this today is that digital literacy is the set of skills and knowledge that a person needs to fully engage with, influence, and derive benefit from the civic, educational, and economic spheres of our world. Digital inclusion encompasses these skills and the access and resources to the modes and networks to utilize these skills through the internet. With us today, we have a fantastic group of panelists: Deb Sosha of Next Century Cities, Denise Lynn of Smart Chicago Collaborative, Chike Agu of EveryoneOn, Susan Burnett of Hack the Hood here in Oakland, and Daman Drummer of Coder Space. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. So we have a total of 60 minutes for this session. Each panelist will speak for 5 minutes about how their work intersects with digital inclusion. So that's their charge. Are you ready to hear your charge? Yep. Yes, okay. So your charge is to get very excited about the rich tapestry of digital inclusion that our panelists will create, and then to engage in dialogue. And deepen our learning of the intersection of digital inclusion and civic tech. So we have very intentionally structured this so it's literally half of us speaking and half of all of us, having a conversation. Sound good? Yes. All right, take it away, Deb.
Hi, I'm Deb Sosha, and as Anne said, I'm the Executive Director of Next Century Cities. We're a brand new nonprofit. We will be a year old next month. And our goal is to help cities, counties, towns that hope to have fast, affordable, reliable broadband. Some already have it. So I work with the little teeny town of Islesboro, Maine. It's a little teeny community on an island off the coast of Maine. But I also work with LA. I also work with Oakland. I work with Boston. I work with Lexington. So a nice mix of cities, some of which actually have a gig and some of which have dial-up. So this rich mix. Prior to doing this, however, I ran the digital inclusion program in Boston, and there are a few folks here. Yasha Franklin Hodge, who is the CIO, Nigel Jacobs from New Urban Mechanics. They're part of the fabric in Boston that really benefits the community through their engagement. So they have helped to keep projects running in Boston. So what we did in Boston is we ran a project called Tech Goes Home, and we provided hardware, training, and support to get low-cost access to tens of thousands of residents across the city. That project then grew. It's now Tech Goes Home Chattanooga and Tech Goes Home a couple of other places. And it's been fairly successful as a way of helping people see why technology is important in their lives and helping them actually get online and use it well. In my current role, one of the questions is about, who owns this problem? Cities deeply care about it, and I hear from cities every day. I work with 118, and they're worried about digital equity for lots of reasons, in part because of e-government, in part because of participatory democracy, but it's also a quality of life issue. It impacts transportation and healthcare and education in all the ways that we know because we are tech users. So the question is really, whose problem is this? And at the city level, I think it's pretty clear that city has some ownership. The city can't do it alone, nor can nonprofits, nor can the libraries or the schools, but as a collaborative, as a group of people, we can actually work together and make it happen. And that's what happens in Boston. So it's a nonprofit that works with the city, with all of the community anchor institutions, and creates this incredible fabric of people who work together to benefit the entire community. So the training part is really a big part of the process, as I'm sure you know, because for a lot of our folks, they aren't quite sure why they want to be online. If you haven't experienced that environment, you don't quite know why. you'd want to have that opportunity. So we need to do a lot of that. We also need to make sure that all of our communities have better than the current access, right? So 25 down, 5 up is what the FCC chair says is table stakes, right? That's the least speed we should be giving. In many of our communities, there are like 2 million Americans that only have dial-up. We really need to think about that as part of the solution, and that for me is a big part of the work that I do. I think the idea that it enables quality of life is something that every single civic organization cares about. Because tech is not just the great enabler, it's the great equalizer. And what I tell folks a lot is there are plenty of easy, quick, and cheap solutions to digital inclusion, and none of them work. And so we need to think about ways that we can work collaboratively, share resources, find funding, and make this work together. Digital equity is entirely achievable. Tech Goes Home is a great example of that. They're not the only example of that. There are lots of them. Denise will talk a bit about Chicago. There's a new program called E2D outside of Charlotte, giving computers to kids in schools. Susan Corbett runs this amazing project in rural Maine. Austin has a great city-based digital inclusion plan. That is a great example of a city really stepping forward. These are homegrown, truly local solutions using available resources and partnerships. Just as an aside, Next Century Cities is running a digital inclusion award program right now. Today is the deadline for applying. But it is really, we actually asked the cities to be the actual applicant, in partnership with city organizations, with CBOs and nonprofits and anchor institutions. It's a pretty easy process. If you haven't applied, you probably could still make it happen. But we want our elected officials involved. We think that that is absolutely necessary. So in the end, we know who's not online, we know why they're not online, we know how to get them online. I think the big question is whether or not we have the will to do it.
Thank you, Deb. So like Ann said, I'm Denise Lynn. I'm with the Smart Chicago Collaborative. I'm a new program analyst there. And Smart Chicago is an interesting model, and Deb talked a bit about what Boston does through Tech Goes Home. So in Chicago, Smart Chicago was co-founded by the city and 2 foundations, the MacArthur Foundation and the Chicago Community Trust, where we're physically housed and where we work out of. So at Smart Chicago, we're actually paid to think about 3 things, and all of our projects fall into these 3 buckets. They're open data, civic tech, and access. So for my job at Smart Chicago, I think mostly about that 3rd piece, access. I manage the Connect Chicago initiative, which is an initiative to align all of the decentralized projects, cross-sector projects that exist in Chicago to increase the digital skills and access in the city. So it's really interesting to be a part of this organization where we have people working in all of those areas. And I think that the title of this panel today is a really innovative one, this conversation we can have. You know, how can civic tech strengthen the work of digital inclusion? How can the 2 communities work together and learn from one another? I think it's a very compelling question, and I hope we all can talk about it today. One thing that struck me this morning with the remarks of the mayor of Oakland was her comment about the digital divide. And it really got me thinking, you know, the digital divide and how it could be obsolete. And it made me think about some of the questions we're grappling with at Smart Chicago. And I know other cities like Austin have been thinking about too. How do we measure success when it comes to bridging the digital divide? What does it mean to be a digitally inclusive city in 2015? Or more importantly, what does it mean to be a digitally inclusive city in 2020? Because that's really what we should care about. And for a while now, ever since really the National Broadband Plan in 2010, we've been talking about broadband adoption, this number, as being the metric for success in digital inclusion. And I'd like to pose a question to the group and talk about this today. You know, should we settle for that metric? Or should we strive to think about other metrics for success? I think today, there's a reason why Deb mentioned the FCC has to revisit standards for broadband speeds every few years. Because as our standards and as people's use of the internet evolves over time, thank you very much. As that evolves over time, our needs and the basic needs of people who use the internet change. And I think that metric, and as a community, the digital inclusion community, we should likewise revisit what it means, the standards we should set and the goals we should set to lift people up and bridge the digital divide. And so if we choose to define broadband adoption and choose to make broadband adoption that metric for success, then yes, the digital divide might be obsolete. But there are other gaps. There are skill gaps. There are gaps in type of usage across the city. And I think we should acknowledge that today, in 2015, it is very possible, if there was a broadband connection in every home, that it doesn't necessarily mean that every home is on equal footing in the digital economy. And also, in terms of households, we can challenge ourselves to think beyond that too. Should we only be thinking about households? There is a digital divide as well when we think about businesses and nonprofits, especially startups. I recently, before I was in Chicago, I was in the Boston area, and I remember I was sitting in Yaj's office, and he was talking about this too, about how businesses struggle to get the speeds that they want. And so there's a spectrum of connectivity gaps, and we should talk about the complexity of that instead of just anchoring ourselves on that number. And I think that we have a really unique opportunity today to have that conversation, to think about those metrics, about what it means to be a digitally inclusive city.
Good afternoon. My name is Chike Agu, and I'm the Chief Program Officer for EveryoneOn. We're a national nonprofit working to close the digital divide, particularly for low-income families. And we came about because today we have tens of millions of Americans who do not have access to high-speed internet. And for us, that is as galling and as unacceptable as it would be if you said 60 million people didn't have electricity, or 60 million people don't have indoor plumbing. This resource is as important as those things, and we were created because that we need that type of urgency. So we are an organization of partners, and we work with folks from internet service providers, device manufacturers, content providers to kind of provide that three-legged stool of digital inclusion. First leg being connectivity, second leg being devices, being laptops, tablets, however you interface with the internet. And then lastly, high quality content, so that once you actually get online, you're actually improving the quality of your life. In the last 2 years, we've been able to connect about 580,000 people across this country. We work in 48 states, and currently we're the nonprofit lead for a White House initiative called Connect Home, whose goal is to pilot in 28 communities, getting families in public housing online. We have some of these cities represented here. Boston is one, but that's 275,000 households. That's 200,000 children who are in K-12 schooling today. And what we've learned so far, and literally we've kicked this off in July. I just was in Kansas City on Monday with Secretary Castro from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to kick off there. We've learned kind of three things so far, and I want to kind of share this with you all, and we'll hope that they're the spring point for conversation. I think the first thing that we've looked at and that we've seen is adoption is king. Access is not enough. Actually getting folks online is important, and it's not trivial. We are sitting with 28 cities across this country, as diverse as Seattle, Washington, to Macon, Georgia, to Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma. And each of these communities has different challenges actually getting folks to adoption, and it cannot be dismissed. I think secondly, what we've seen is the way cities have tackled that challenge is, and it's a cliche, but it's true. It is a village approach. The coalition you need for this is beyond the mayor's office, beyond the public housing authority or the school district. It's the churches who can help folks get signed up. It is the public library system who in Kansas City is actually serving as a distribution point for Wi-Fi hotspots, and folks can check them out the same way they check out books. Or it's frankly maybe the one lady in the community that everyone knows and respects who's been there forever who can help create that urgency within her community to get folks online. I think the last thing is we've seen is digital inclusion is not something that you can do to communities. It's not something that you can do for communities. You have to do it with communities. When we approach communities about digital inclusion, we don't talk a lot about the internet, at least when we do it. We say, what's important to you? So you go to the city of San Antonio, they're going to tell you that we have too many young kids who don't have access to high quality content. We need to make sure kids are ready before they get to school. So they want to work with ABC Mouse to get folks connected and get access to their young kids for high quality content. You go to Baltimore, they have a big maker movement. They want to get kids into STEM education as quickly as possible. So we're working with them on that. You have some cities that are focused on workforce development. You have to tie the internet to what communities and what people actually care about. I think at times those of us who love technology can fetishize it and make it an end in and of itself, and it's not, particularly for folks who are living day to day, paycheck to paycheck. So what we've learned so far, again, adoption is king. It's going to take a village to make that happen, and we've got to make sure we're doing this with communities so that it's relevant, that it's important, and that it actually gets done. And I hope this serves as kind of a platform for conversation going forward.
I just want to second all those comments. They resonate so deeply with me. I'm Susan Burnett. I'm a former Silicon Valley techie, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hack the Hood. And we're a program that very much rides on the heels of what could you do with broadband, or how can you empower young people, because we focus on working with young people of color ages 16 to 25 who are not in schools or in programs where they really have access to coding, to programming, or to tech. So we do summer boot camps and then alumni cohorts where young people really get to learn about the tech ecosystem, meet people of color working in tech, and move from people who are consumers of technology to people who realize they can be producers of technology. We don't focus on coding as the only option. We want young people to be able to participate in the tech economy and do all the different kinds of jobs that are out there, not only being a front-end developer, back-end developer, full-stack engineer, but doing things like user experience, front-end design, game design. And the young people we work with are digital natives. But even though they live in Oakland and the Bay Area, they've never seen themselves, for the most part, being in tech, because tech is very white. It's not very inclusive. We've all seen those numbers. And a lot of our mission is to wake young people up and say, you can do this. Here are the pathways to do this. Here's how you can learn to do this. I think one of the reasons when I'm on this panel is that our model is also very place-based. Young people learn these skills by building websites and offering web services to local small businesses and nonprofit organizations. So we've built over 200 websites for businesses in the Bay Area who mostly did not have access to web services. People who were small business people bootstrapping, people who were first generation or immigrants who, were really kind of scraping by and couldn't afford a site, people whose third cousin built a site that was not mobile responsive or mobile friendly. So it's very important to us to really support the communities and draw that link between tech and places. So it's not just about being on the tech bus, it's about how tech can support entrepreneurship and put money back into the community. I worked for the Knight Foundation for several years as a consultant working with civic engagement projects. And as a techie, I felt very isolated from my community when I kept getting transferred around the country to work at these big tech organizations, and really wanted to do some place-based things when I came to Oakland. And realized that my neighbors in Oakland didn't know how to get on the Google bus. They felt very shut out. And it's been a very powerful project. We're only 2 years old, but we have a collective impact model. So to do Hack the Hood in a community, we not only partner with a youth-based organization that can provide wraparound services, counseling, academic support, we partner with the city, the Office of Economic Development. We partner with business networks that can help vet us and validate, no, we're not going to charge you money at the end of this process and play some kind of game. We're actually legit. And it's very transformative for the young people because they not only work with our trained instructors who are mostly people of color with educational technology backgrounds, we get to work with all these mentors and volunteers who are at tech companies who come in and teach design workshops, teach workshops in technical interviewing, teach all kinds of skills. So they really start to see a path. We're also a very data-driven and evaluation-driven organization. We got a grant from the Andreessens to develop an evaluation framework. So we use that to kind of check how we're doing and what's working and what isn't. And the two metrics that we care about the most are increasing the level of education. For some of our youth, that means going to college, studying computer science. For some people, it means getting a certificate where they can move from making, minimum wage to doing something in tech while they're going to school. So level of education, level of income are two of our key metrics, but also mapping the community and bringing people together, like a youth group and the Chamber of Commerce who might never have talked to each other. So really trying to create more of a virtual circle. I'll say one more thing before I close, is that 2 years ago, 2014, we were one of the winners of the Bay Area Google Impact Challenge. And it kind of went from being a group with a summer program with no full-time paid staff to a group that now has served over 250 youth. So we are going to be expanding around the Bay Area and potentially around the country for the coming year. If there are people in the audience who want to learn more about that and think that we might be a good fit for partnership, I'd love to talk to you.
All right, and I'll try to keep my remarks short. I'm between conversation and cupcakes, so I think I saw some cupcakes out there. So my name is Daman Drummer. I'm the founder of CoderSpace. We create engaging learning experiences along a clear path of skill development to inspire a new generation of tech leaders who work primarily on the south side of Chicago. We're a new organization within our first year of founding, and we ran our first summer program just this past summer, July and August of 2015. In essence, like Hack the Hood, we teach young people how to code and how to build websites for businesses and organizations and their own community. We're able to solve two problems at the same time. One, increasing the digital skills and competitive digital skills with our youth, and two, getting some local businesses, organizations, and institutions online who are not currently online or have a website from 2005 or 2007 that is not optimized for the mobile web. I've come to this space through a pretty long process. I'm not going to outline that. But one thing I do want to bring to the conversation is those of us who are concerned about digital literacy and digital inclusion, we would do well to look to the example of Septima Clark, who in 1956 was fired from her job as a teacher in Charleston, South Carolina, for exercising her constitutional right of freely associating with the NAACP. This is after Brown v. Board of Education. She took that egregious violation of her constitutional rights and decided to, on a full-time basis, mobilize her experience as an educator with her passion for justice. And she decided to teach literacy. Because if you remember at the time in the Jim Crow South, literacy tests were used to prevent black people from accessing the ballot and fully participating in democratic life, right? And so she used literacy to tear down that wall. And she saw literacy as a means of building power. It wasn't just literacy as a means of literacy, which is great. It was literacy as a means to power. And so that's the frame that I've used. That's the frame that we adopted in Chicago with the Smart Communities Program in partnership with Smart Chicago, List Chicago, the City of Chicago, and the Trust. But it's also the lens that I bring to the work of CoderSpace. I truly believe that the best way to keep our cities competitive is to build a broad base of tech talent. And so digital literacy, whether you're talking about how to access email for a senior citizen, or teaching a young person how to build a website for a local business, and then teaching that local business owner how to get on PayPal. So one of our clients is a dry cleaners. He wants to be able to accept payments online, where the students are able to coach that proprietor who's excellent at dry cleaning. He does the jerseys for the White Sox. He knows what he's doing, right? But he definitely needs some support and training on how to use technology to further his business, bring more customers into his establishment. And so one thing I do want to bring to the table is, if we're going to talk about digital literacy and digital inclusion, and tequity, we're not doing anything if we're not talking about power. And so I want to add that to the conversation.
Can we get a quick round of applause for these amazing panelists? Thank you so much. So do you see up here, there's a couple hashtags. Definitely as we go along, if you want to tweet, include those, as well as Tequity. That was a really good thing that was introduced this morning. So I'd like to ask the first question. So digital inclusion, civic tech, broadly thought of as two separate communities. How can these two communities work together for greatest effect?
I'll take that, yeah. Like I said at Smart Chicago, I feel really blessed that I've worked in other digital inclusion spaces before. I actually started my career as an AmeriCorps Vista doing broadband adoption and digital literacy work. Yay, AmeriCorps! And that was in a rural context, so that was interesting. But I have cared about this issue for a while, and I feel very blessed that now at Smart Chicago, I can also do it alongside people that think about civic tech and think about open data. And when we think about it, civic tech and digital inclusion, they have the same big picture mission. It's to improve people's lives through technology. I think that the two communities, we talk about them separately, but in essence, we shouldn't treat them separately. And I've actually written up a blog post about this topic too, and if anyone's interested, you can look on the Smart Chicago Collaborative website and look up the blog, but I think that the civic tech community can learn a lot about training, about one-on-one community engagement from the digital inclusion community, specifically trainers and digital literacy program managers. I think the digital inclusion space can learn a lot about civic tech and how civic tech looks at user experience and the frameworks that they put on the tools they create for communities. Just as a specific example, Sonia Marziano is sitting up here. You should wave your hand. She has a breakout session tomorrow at this time, and she's going to be talking about the Cut Group, which is a project out of the Smart Chicago Collaborative. And that project, we pay residents of Cook County and the city of Chicago to test apps and websites that are publicly facing. But we realized, user testing and user experience doesn't always have to be responsive to an app or a website. We can test and ask people about their user experience with the suite of digital inclusion and digital access programs in the city of Chicago. What is your user experience as a resident of this neighborhood in Chicago? What are the resources you take advantage of? What resources are available but you feel like are blocked off to you, or you don't feel welcome in? And we want to gather up those unknown unknowns, and we found this new way to basically marry civic tech frameworks with digital inclusion need. And I don't know, I think there are a lot more opportunities, and I'd like to hear from other people in this room who have ideas about how the civic tech communities and digital inclusion communities can work together.
I would like to actually hear about that too. Before we potentially get more panelist response on that, is there anything you guys would like to share? All right, okay, so.
So I think one of the things that digital inclusion programs do really well is understand community. Understand who in the community holds the power. And as you said, it is often not the people you presume, right? It is often communities of faith. They are a really great resource. That's where the trust is. And I like to tell folks that progress happens at the speed of trust, right? Somebody said that a long time ago. I don't know who I'm quoting, but it's a really helpful quote, right? And I think that's what digital inclusion projects are really good at. And I think in engaging with civic tech, they can provide that level of trust and that validity that's sometimes harder to do from the outside in, because digital inclusion happens from the inside out.
Let's see.
And from the bottom up, right? From the inside out and the bottom up. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's exactly right.
So you guys have worked in a variety of contexts. I'm excited, Denise, to hear that you worked in rural America as a Vista. We've heard a little bit about the importance of place. When the rubber meets the road, how do you, make sure that whatever initiative you're co-creating literally, authentically represents what needs to happen? Who would like to offer?
We're huge practitioners of user-centered design and including the community. And the work that we do. And for us, that means both working deeply with small business networks who are our partners to understand what the businesses participating in those networks say they need, but also working with the youth to help understand what the youth's aspirations and their intentions are. So we have to be flexible sometimes. We have young people who might go through our boot camp and say, this was really great. I want to work in psychology, or I want to be a lawyer, and that's okay. You know, we need to support them in the path that they're going down. But we had one kid who was like, I want to work with youth, and when she came back for the second year as an instructor in our program, she was like, oh my God, I love empowering these younger people with what I learned. I think I might want to be an educational technology teacher. You know, so there's a balance between trying to really bring the people that we're working with in as owners of what happens, because we're trying to serve them. And then also realizing that it's our job to introduce new concepts that they might not be familiar with, that when they see them are super attractive. And that can be a little challenging sometimes, because I think ultimately the people that we're serving should have the ownership. But it's always tempting to show people a lot of things. So, you know, as somebody who, you know, has privilege, I'm always trying to balance that.
Thanks, Susan. Let's see. What are some of the biggest barriers to success when we are working on digital inclusion?
I mean, I would argue I would put them in kind of two buckets. There's the technical bucket. You know, we're working with Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, a 10-county territory where at times for a mile you'll have maybe one or two people. There are structural and technical barriers to kind of getting folks connected there. There's another bucket, which actually generally I find usually a bigger bucket, and I don't know what other label to give it, but political. The reason I'm hopeful about Choctaw Nation is that the coalition that they've assembled, from their public housing residents to their chambers of commerce to local tribal institutions, the folks they've brought together to say we're going to solve this, that gives me the confidence that they're going to get over the technical barriers, and I'm watching them do it now. If we go for the 28 communities that we work with as part of the Connect Home initiative, the conversations I have with them, yes, to a small extent, are about ISPs, what devices can I get, you know, I'm trying to get around the paywall for this piece of content that was committed to us. But the more the conversation I have is who should be at the table to try and get this done. There are lots of things that are available to folks that folks never sign up for, either because they don't know, because they don't feel it's for them, because no one has made the value proposition to them, or the folks who are trying to get it out to communities, frankly, aren't committed to it for the long run. So how do we create that political coalition in any community over time that outlasts the mayor or the congressperson or anyone else, and that can mobilize the community to get over the technical barrier? So again, I think the technical and I think the political are equally important, and I would argue the political is even more so.
So I'll add a few other things and I'm going to talk from a much lower level, right? So we all know low-income families really struggle. It was interesting because one of the things we discovered was if we had a family that didn't qualify for any of the low-income options, the low-cost options, once they understood the value to their family and found ways they could save money using technology, they paid full price. So I was pretty surprised by that, but actually price wasn't the biggest barrier. I think relevancy was. Why does this matter to me? And the folks that weren't online are the people we know, right? We know it's really low-income people. We know it's folks that are new to this country, folks who don't speak English, seniors, and disabled folks, right? And so figuring out how to address each of their needs is unique. And thinking about what is important to each of those groups, as you said, it's not telling people why it's good for you, but saying, what are your needs and how can we help you fulfill those? For our seniors, it was often, how do I Skype with my grandchildren? As a grandmother, I can tell you, I love Skype. I can be anywhere and see that little baby walk. It matters. It helps us feel a part of the lives of our families. For our people who are disabled and who aren't able to get around, it's their lifeline, right? It's how I order my groceries. For people who are non-English speaking, there are lots of resources, and we can find ways to help people connect back home with their families for less money than they would if they called on the phone, right? Because you can use Google Phone for 3 cents a minute to call the Dominican Republic, right? And so helping people understand the ways in which technology really impacted their lives and could help them save money and help improve their quality of life, and starting with them as the resource. And I'll just say 2 other really quick things that are related to some of what you said. And one is that one of the projects of Tech Goes Home is an early childhood project that helps low-income, very young children and their families figure out ways to help their children go to school kindergarten ready. That's an amazing project. And I'm thrilled about that as an educator. I was a long-term educator, because so often the children come so far behind that it's hard to catch them up. So this is a proactive strategy. And the other one that Tech Goes Home ran, which is very related, is a small business project, helping people understand how to organize, market, and sell. And we're talking mom and pop businesses, often new to the country. They come with skills but without credentials. So how do you help people get online, get a business going, and actually support their own families? So that was a really great project as well.
Thanks, Deb. Daman, so you have launched what many would argue is a highly unique, very forward-thinking model of youth engagement and digital inclusion. You've done this in the south side of Chicago, a place that is, the main anchor, as I recall, is University of Chicago. It should not come as a surprise. As also I understand, there is a love-hate relationship with University of Chicago.
This is being recorded.
Well, I mean, this is just.
It's true.
This is just. It's a thing. So, I would love to hear from you, like in these early days of CoderSpace. How have you navigated all of this?
Yeah. It's interesting. So if I understand the question, it's not so much to talk about how CoderSpace is part of U of C's re-engagement with its surrounding neighborhood, but more how an institution like the University of Chicago, who wants to reimagine its relationship with the surrounding community, would invest in a project like CoderSpace. For what reason? Well, one, we know in parts of Chicago there are many communities where there are local businesses who do amazing work and just aren't discoverable by folks even in the neighborhood unless you walk past and know that it's open. Again, the dry cleaners that is second generation, black owned. They do the jerseys for the White Sox. I mean, those jerseys are pristine, right? They do my clothing. That's why sometimes I look so fresh and fly, right? But he would like to expand his market beyond, the south side there. So how does he do that? Well, he needs a better online presence. And so U of C sees that, the university has a vested interest in communities around the university thriving. And the way you do that is support local businesses and you support young people, right? And so what happens when our parents are bragging about what their students did this summer and how they built a website for the Woodlawn East community and neighbors, how they built CoderSpace's website, students are actually getting calls from their friends, from their parents' friends saying, hey, can you build our site as well? To say nothing for CoderSpace getting calls as well. And we have to absorb all of this interest and then deploy our students accordingly. I have not figured out how to do that, right? But we're working that out right now. And so it's very clear, going back to barriers, I think there's a barrier that's been standing as long as this country has been in existence. We believe that there are some people who are better than others, even now in 2015, right? I've done this work for at least 4 years. And every year I go faster, we teach more. I started a new organization to do this exclusively. All we do is teach kids how to code. And I have never broken a student. I've never reached a point where a student just cannot handle the pressure and the stress. In 8 weeks, we take students who have never touched a line of code, who may express some interest in tech, and they work with a team to build a website for a local client. The only framework we use is Twitter Bootstrap. We use Sidekick as a CMS. I mean, that's 8 weeks, and it's all up to those students to get that done, to learn and to work together on those projects. For the first 2 weeks, they build a site for themselves. Second 2 weeks, they work together as a team to build a site for their team to kind of brand themselves. Then for the last 4 weeks, they build a site for a client. They're learning about how to engage the user, right? They're learning how to work together. That's probably the biggest thing that we teach. So that's why I think CoderSpace is the type of project U of C is using to, and I say using, right? To say, hey, we are concerned about our neighborhood. And they also offer tremendous support. They help get the word out into schools. We have access to space and university facilities for free. We use their very high-speed internet connection to do our programming, et cetera.
Something I find so inspiring about the work that Susan and Daman do is that it really, I think for so many people, the words digital inclusion and digital literacy means something remedial, like we have to teach everyone Microsoft Word, or everyone needs to be at a basic level of understanding, but you're like, no, digital inclusion, to be welcome in the digital economy, to be really included in 21st century learning, we're gonna encourage you to build a website for a local business, or do whatever you need to do to help businesses next door. I don't know, I just think that it's a wonderful bar to set, and I think that that's something that we should feel comfortable with, demanding more out of what we expect from the term digital inclusion. So, yeah, I think you guys are great.
Thank you. I also want to stress the importance of measurable real-world outcomes. I always talk about our organization as outcome-based versus experience-based. The first summer we did it, I was very naive. I was like, oh, this is great. We're going to show these kids a career path. They're each going to have a path, and it's going to be perfect. And what I discovered is that for our young people, the pathways are broken. The community colleges don't teach the right things. They don't have guidance to get into the right programs. They enroll in school and drop out because of money issues. It's not a clear path at all. So just the way Daman is sort of thinking about what do I do next, we went through the same thing. We've expanded to have more year-round programming and support. But I think that the way that people in the equity space can really make a difference is to be leaders in being inclusive. Tech is not an inclusive system. We're doing this because tech companies are not reaching out to average low-income young people of color to bring them in. They're looking for top talent, people who are unicorns or extraordinarily gifted. We're really interested in the fact that so many of these young people are bright, innovative, resilient, and there are not programs for them. And we don't want to see them get left behind. We want to see them making the same kind of money that people from a more higher economic level who are more seen as mainstream can have. So I think for people who are working in the digital space, you need to embrace that. Look at your own brigades and your cohorts. Are you really reaching out to people in your community that could be part of this, or are you seeing them as other? I mean, this is a journey that everyone needs to make on their own, but it's also a journey we need to make collectively. And I think that change is really about taking those steps together.
As I was hearing you talk, there's a story that I think is kind of ties all this together in terms of adoption, inclusion, how do we get folks into this digital economy. For our organization, a great partner of ours is GitHub, and a great guy there who we work with is Danilo Campos, and he heads up their social impact. Some of you may know him. He is kind of in that vanguard of Latinos here in the Valley, and computer science guy. Literally millions of people have looked at the code that he's written, and that's kind of the end of his story as he'll tell it. The beginning of his story is when he was 2 years old. His mother, with him and nothing else, came from Puerto Rico, ended up in public housing in Manhattan. And the thing that changed his life was when he was 8 years old, he got access to the internet in his home and taught himself how to code over time. And today he is where he is. So talking about how that adoption being key, and then using the resources that are available to demand more of digital inclusion. That's kind of that full circle. That's when we talk about the work of Connect Home or anything else that we do. We're saying that's what we're talking about. There's some kids somewhere who can do that, and what stands between them is an internet connection and someone showing them what they can do with it.
That's it. And again, can people hear me? Is this fine? To build on what Denise said about forward looking, and what Susan and Chike is talking about with things happening not to communities but from, as well as Deb. The work I used to do was a tech organizer, and I just spent a lot of time responding to what the neighborhood was telling me what to do, right? And ran into a young student who wanted to learn how to code, right, to build a website for somebody. And so we launched a program that did that. And there were a bunch more students who wanted to do that, right? We also saw that there were local business owners, right? I mean, it's Susan, who didn't have the time to use a Squarespace or WordPress, but didn't have the money to retain somebody who, you know, they would actually trust with their online web presence. So we decided to solve that as well. And so I think the hood and the holler, right, the rural hood, right, are moving faster. They're demanding more than what I think sometimes the digital inclusion space gets, to Denise's point, right? And I think we can respond to the communities that are considered left out and just literally have authentic engagement and conversation. And those who are embedded in those neighborhoods, those who lead those neighborhoods and communities, that's where the answers are, bottom up, inside out.
And the other point I just want to emphasize is that for so many people that we work with, you're a young person, you go through a 6-week program, you get out and you have an amazing side hustle. You can make professional quality websites for people that you know. You can own something. You can own your own business as you continue your education or your training. And in Hack the Hood, we've had at least 3 groups of young people, because for us, the cohorts, the community that forms is like a work family in our program. But at least 3 groups of young people formed their own companies, including companies that wanted to pitch and win $1,000 prizes, but wanted to really become successful. And I think that you have to realize that entrepreneurship is so important. Being able to feel that you can create something that you can own, that you can make money with, is so important. And that's something that it's really important to put into our communities where people don't often have that, and they're very frustrated because they want it, but they don't know how to get it. And with the digital space, with access to the internet and some tools, you can really start to build something for yourself and your family.
I'm delighted to share that some of our audience members would like to talk to you. Nigel, you're up first.
So I'm wondering about sort of 2 things. So earlier on in the discussion, and the question was about what the intersection is between digital inclusion and civic tech. I've been thinking about that. And then so that is context. And my general question is thinking about like what does success look like, right? Are we simply trying to get kids into tech jobs? Or is there something different, right? Because civic tech, to me, and this is my own personal view, it is not a market, it is a way of thinking, it is the spirit and the value with which we build certain kinds of tools. So it seems to me that that suggests the intersection, but you guys kind of hinted at it, but I just wanted you guys to sort of talk a little bit about what does success look like? Are we simply trying to get kids into those jobs, or sort of these underrepresented groups into some of these jobs, or is there something different that we're talking about here?
Chicago has a great line in the Chicago Tech Plan, and back me up here, Denise, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Right. Chicago aspires to achieve full participation in the digital economy, right? That's connection, that's skills, that's local business, that's households, that's schools, fully realizing the benefits of digital technology to make a more thriving, more prosperous city, right? And so I think that's what we mean. I think that's one understanding of digital inclusion and its obvious intersection with civic tech.
And I think that's a really important question too, Nigel. And I think that it is important to give opportunities for children who want to enter the tech space and give them a pipeline no matter where they are in terms of skill, where they started, where they grew up, where they're from. If they're interested in tech, give them that pipeline. I don't think that's the only goal. I think Deb really nailed it on the head where it's almost a very individual question to ask each person, like, where do you want to go? And sometimes that's not always going to be tech. Not everyone's going to end up being like a developer. And I mean, I think that's a reality that we're comfortable with. Like, some technology above all is a tool, and it's a method to get people where they want to go. And so I think that is one version of what success looks like, and that's certainly a success story, but it's not the only success story.
So I'll just say that a couple of years ago, I really stopped calling it digital inclusion and started calling it digital equity, right? We will be doing this right when we all have the same outcomes, right? That it's not just that we're trying to get equitable inputs, We're trying to make sure everybody has access, everybody has technology, but also that the outcomes are identical. So that if I'm using technology to do my job, to do my grocery shopping, to pay my parking ticket, which if you live in Boston, you got one, right? It's just part for the course. If I am comfortable with all those things, as soon as we get to a place where everybody's comfortable with all those things and chooses between them, because maybe I don't want to shop online, but I know how, and I can because I've got the resources. As soon as we get to a place where it's equitable, I'll be happy, right?
So we have a few more minutes, and I see one question. Are there other questions? Okay. I would like this. I would like to hear all of your questions for us to document them and for us to then be able to like meaningfully engage you beyond the 3 minutes we have remaining. Does that sound good? Okay. What is your question?
So I just want to throw something out there that I haven't heard from the panel yet. For context, I'm from Seattle, and I found that it's relatively easy to find mentors, volunteers, and funding for programs that are located in a place that's convenient for those people. So around major universities like Chicago or University of Washington. But what the challenge is that the digital equity issues in our region are largely for communities that can't afford to live anywhere near the major tech employers or the major universities, folks in the suburbs and folks in rural areas. So I would just love to kind of raise the question and talk to folks who've been working on this for a while. How do you reach people who are not anywhere in that galaxy of resources?
So I'm actually going to respond really fast so that we can get to that other question. At Tech Goes Home, we actually run the program in the neighborhoods where people live. So working with community anchor institutions and trusted resources already there, schools, library, community centers, churches, whatever resource in that community is usable, we used, right? And we did train the trainer, so the person who did the training still works there tomorrow or still attends that church tomorrow. And so there were long-term supports given to everyone. So, and honestly, it was a big deal in Boston anyway, because every big urban community's got some gang issues, and in Boston, they're all block related. So sometimes people can't cross that boundary to get to that other resource. It needs to be in the neighborhood, and we found it really very powerful.
Sorry, really quickly. One interesting new model I tripped over, I thought was so cool that you might want to look up is this project called Destination Chicago, and it's a mobile van, like a mobile computer lab, and they partner with the parks of Chicago. And I don't know, I think that we should experiment more with mobile traveling things that can fill in those digital deserts. But
Thanks, Denise. Yes.
This is Jean Rice. I just commend you all on what a great job you're doing, and say one of the things that I find great about this conference and others is that you can share information and learn from what others have done or done well, done bad. I'm at NTIA, which is part of Broadband USA. We have a portal that has from our grants, where we have a lot of curriculums that people have used. But I'd like to keep that alive and going. I know there's some Chicago and elsewhere from programs, but it is a way that we can also keep exchanging information.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I had a similar question. It seems like you have a really wonderful place-based sensitivity. And so I was wondering what we can do sort of across place as a system and as a community of practice to do more to share and to build power, particularly with regards to fundraising. Because you mentioned a lot of the political challenges you get at the local level and the federal level. But we're doing this all across the country, and it seems like there could be more that we could collaborate on to be getting funding in all sorts of places.
That is such a good question and is relevant to the work that each and every one of you do. I think there's a lot of appetite for figuring that out. Let's keep talking. Yes. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So from county government, so two-part question. One, I'm really interested in your take on the moral imperative of policymakers and government of addressing digital equity as we talk about 21st century government, what that means for access and informed citizenry. And the other part, I work in criminal justice reform, and I'm interested in whether you're seeing this type of work
in the criminal justice reform space around re-entry and how we're thinking of individuals who are coming back into communities from jails and prisons and how they need this same type of conversation and skill set to be integrated.
There's a fabulous project you should check out based in the Bay Area called The Last Mile, which works with inmates who've been through GED programs at San Quentin.
Sure. On that score, in Baltimore, you have a group of community individuals who actually are going into 2 jails in Baltimore City with folks serving 3 to 5 year sentences, teaching at this point basic kind of Microsoft certification, Cisco certification, but going actually into website design so that when folks come out, they have marketable skills and are actually tied to Baltimore companies. And then to the question behind you about kind of how we source resources, the Connect Home initiative, which I'm a part of, there is not one dime of federal money. This is all stewarded commitments across ISPs, nonprofit folks, and also content providers. So I'm happy to talk with you about how that works, and I think it's a model that is going to have to scale going forward because, again, the days of kind of huge dollars coming from Washington, I think, is over.
So they've opened the doors. Does that mean we have to go? Okay. I can't thank you all enough, and I can't thank this group all enough. Thank you.